Good evening. I would like to welcome our special guests, students, and faculty to this Monday night's lecture. As you may or may not know, my name is Kevin Russell, and as Arlene said, I am the president of the Balthazar chapter of NOMAS, which is the National Organization of Minority Architecture Students. And it is indeed our pleasure as a chapter to host Ms. Kane's Weisman. Ms. Weisman has led the way with her advocacy for the improvement of all design fields to better serve the needs of all citizens, regardless of race, class, gender, or abilities. If we are the professionals responsible for designing our cities, open spaces, and the built environment, isn't it about time we started designing those spaces for all the people who utilize them? Without any further introduction, Ms. Arlene Brady, who will introduce Ms. Weisman.
I first heard about the work of President Kane's Weisman in Cincinnati when I was working on some projects with Women's Research and Development Consortium in WRDC in Cincinnati. And one of the things that I became aware of at that time was her groundbreaking work on rethinking the way we design residential housing. And since then, she's expanded that work into what I would like to say challenging the prototype of one size fits all, and expanding the work into medical facilities, hospices, AIDS research. And with that introduction, I would like to introduce you to Leslie Kane's Weisman, Associate Professor and former Associate Dean at New Jersey Institute of Technology, talking to us tonight about the spaces between us.
So, let's see if this, it works. Thank you, it works. Okay. Well, happy Halloween, everybody. It's a pleasure to be back in the Midwest, which is the place in which I was born and raised, not far from here in Detroit. And there's some people that I'd like to thank before I get started this evening. Dean Bob Custer and Professor Martin Rosenman, Professor Meyer, particularly Ron Pierce and Stacy Stinson for driving all the way to Dayton to pick me up today and engaging me in some very provocative conversation along the way in a lovely tour of your campus. And Kevin Russell and NOMAS for the reception of Mr. Qual, where I hope I'll get to meet a number of you and talk with you personally about things that may interest us both. When Arlene Brady called me and asked if I needed 1 or 2 slide projectors, I said, oh, I'm in trouble here because I wasn't really planning to use any slides, which is enough to give any architect or architecture students a pause because we're quite used to looking at images and things. And so in honor of Halloween and in honor of the need to appease all of your anxiety, I decided I would make one perfect slide, which I did do, only I neglected to bring it with me. So you're going to have to use your spatial imagination and imagine the slide that would have appeared probably over here had I been able to bring it along. It's in honor of Halloween and in honor of all student initiatives. It's an image of a car that I happened to see in a shop in Greenwich Village in New York where I live. And I got so convulsed over it, I really wanted to share it with you. It's an image of a witch flat against a skyscraper, having just splattered herself all over this building with a broken broomstick. And on the back of this witch is a big sign that says, "Student Witch." It seemed to me appropriate for Halloween and appropriate for all of us who are both students and teachers, and we are generally always both, to honor the efforts that we all make in trying to learn our craft, whatever that craft may be, whether it's flying or trying to build buildings. I do get to do a lot of traveling around the country, and I've come to discover that no matter where I go, regardless of whether it's the coasts or in the middle of America, most thinking Americans are certainly aware today of the pressing social issues of our time, unprecedented unemployment, inconceivably high health care costs, and unaffordable housing, all of which collectively contribute to the burgeoning numbers of homeless nationwide. Americans are beginning to understand the dangerous and potentially irrevocable consequences of pollution and irresponsible and excessive energy consumption. All of us, including suburbanites, are slowly realizing that we are all affected by the racial injustice that disproportionately locates the evils of crime, of illiteracy, of poverty and substance abuse within the largely African American and Hispanic populations that reside in America's deteriorating inner cities. Yet despite the general awareness that most Americans have of our social problems, very few of us understand the role that the built environment plays in supporting relationships of social inequality, and fewer still have asked themselves if or how our physical surroundings could be designed differently to contribute to human liberation, health, and welfare. Just suppose if we could build anew our cities, our suburbs, our workplaces, and our dwellings in ways that fostered relationships of equality and environmental wholeness, what would they be like? And how can we even begin to imagine such a radically different landscape while we continue to live in a society in which all people are not yet fully liberated? In my recently published book, Discrimination by Design, a feminist critique of the man-made environment, which was released in '92 and is now available as of several months ago in paperback, I raise and explore these questions by explaining how buildings and communities are designed and used both symbolically and literally to reinforce the social place held by different members of society. After all, the wealthy live in penthouse apartments, the poor in public housing projects, and each group knows on which side of the tracks it belongs. This evening, I'd like to share with you some of the narratives from my book that describe how our physical surroundings shape the experiences of our daily lives and the cultural assumptions in which they're immersed. However, because I believe that the real value in a public appearance by an author does not reside merely in the recitation of their written words, which are, after all, easily available to anyone who wants to read, I'd rather begin with an explanation of the personal and professional motives that caused me to write that book in the first place. I actually began working on Discrimination by Design in June of 1980 at the request of two publishers who were in the audience when I was delivering a paper at a National Women's Studies Association conference in Lawrence, Kansas. But the real origins of my book can be traced to the 1960s, when I, like so many women of my generation, found that my values and my sensibilities were being dramatically reshaped by the growing momentum of the women's movement. The exhilaration of discovering sisterhood and my enduring outrage at the indecencies and indignities of institutionalized sexism, racism, classism, and heterosexism would forever alter my sense of self, my perceptions of the world around me, and my work as an architectural educator. I began teaching at University of Detroit 28 years ago, so I've been doing this for quite a while. I've never regretted a minute of it. It's enormously challenging and exciting thing to do. In 1974, I co-founded a feminist design school with 6 other women from around the country called the Women's School of Planning and Architecture. This school was a national summer program that, as we bragged about in our brochure, was the first of its kind to be completely founded, owned, financed, and run by women for women interested in the environmental design professions and trades. During the 7 creative, successful years of this operation, from 1974 through '81, we raised and explored a lot of difficult and, I thought, important questions. We asked ourselves, as feminists, how should we teach and learn? How should we practice architecture, planning, landscape architecture? Who should be our clients? Do women design differently than men, and if so, why and how? How does gender affect one's housing? introduction to my book, I wrote the following. It is easy to accept unthinkingly the man-made landscape as a neutral background. It's not so easy to understand the environment as an active shaper of human identity and life's events. In this regard, there is a striking parallel between space and language. We are taught to imagine that the language we use is value-free and neutral, that man and he are generic terms that include women. Feminist linguists have developed convincing arguments to the contrary, revealing how male-centered language perpetuates women's invisibility and inequality. Space, like language, is socially constructed. The spatial and like the syntax of language, the spatial arrangements of our buildings and communities reflect and reinforce the nature of gender, race, and class relations in society. Architecture, both the use of language and space contribute to the power of some groups over others and the maintenance of human inequality. Architecture, thus defined, is a record of deeds done by those who have had the power to build. It is shaped by social, political, and economic forces and values embodied in the forms themselves, the processes through which they are built, and the manner in which they are used. Creating buildings involves moral choices that are subject to moral judgment. It is within this social context of built space that I believe feminist criticism and activism have a profoundly important role to play. By the early 1980s, for me and for countless others, feminism had become more than a social justice movement grounded in political activism. It had become a set of moral and philosophical beliefs, a way of being and behaving in the world that would guide our actions and our choices, our commitments to ourselves and to others for the rest of our lives. I wore my feminist perspective like a pair of corrective lenses, through which the myopic distortions of the lives and natures of women, peoples of color, and other marginalized groups, as imagined by white males, were suddenly refocused for me with both a liberating and an alarming clarity. And with it, I began to see the built landscape as a text, both a mirror and a shaper of social relations among human beings. I began to see that there were spatial dimensions to women's issues like reproductive freedom and pornography and the Equal Rights Amendment. Eventually, I came to call the introduction to my book The Spatial Dimensions of Feminism, and in it I included the following explanation. The feminist with a spatial consciousness instinctively knows that the uterus is the primordial human space, and the invasion of a woman's body privacy by anti-abortion legislators, advocates of forced sterilization, rapists, and greedy pornographers is the most violent form of trespassing. He or she understands that a woman's sexuality is defined by her spatial location, that the virtuous woman is found in the male-headed nuclear family house, the whore in the house of ill repute, and in the embodiment of any woman who dares to walk alone on the streets at night. Such a feminist sees that the obstetrical ward is designed to isolate women from the human community as though childbirth was a contagious disease. The person who approaches the question of equal rights for women with a spatial consciousness realizes that women will never be equal in the public workplace until the private domestic workplace is redesigned to reflect the awareness that we are all, irrespective of gender, responsible for the places in which we live. Discoveries like these flooded my mind with the pages of my manuscript, and although they were rather interesting, at least they were to me, I also knew that they were still relatively fragmented and anecdotal stories. It took me another 2 years before I would discover a coherent basis upon which to develop a feminist theory of the social construction of the man-made environment. It actually fell into place when I began to realize that the familiar concept of the dichotomy that is so patriarchal social space in which people are classified into opposing and unequally valued groups of rich and poor, black and white, male and female, young and old, straight and gay, is also used to define the way patriarchal society conceptualizes metaphysical space, heaven and hell, and yes, physical space, workplaces and dwellings, cities and suburbs. Somatic space, the cardinal points of the human body, are dichotomous categories, front and back, top and bottom, right and left, that are also used to structure both our physical world and our social worldview. In social space, we grovel at the feet of the powerful. Equals look each other in the eye, and the person who heads an organization is the highest authority. In cosmological space, Christ sits at the right hand of the Father. In the Last Judgment, Jesus is depicted in a painting with his right hand raised toward the brightness of heaven and his left hand pointing downward to the dark depths of hell. In physical space, honored guests, people with status, enter buildings through the front door. Children, servants, the unimportant, enter through the back. These three spatial realms, social, built, and metaphysical, collectively constitute the symbolic universe that structures human experience and defines human reality, but far from being absolute. The symbolic universe varies greatly from different culture to culture, since it is subjectively created. Yet by its very nature, it appears to be an inevitable totality that makes our everyday roles, our values, and our behaviors legitimate. What do I mean? Well, for example, that's why the prejudiced individual, the bigot, when confronted with repeatedly intelligent remarks that are meant to diffuse stereotypical or demeaning statements about somebody being a Jew or being a woman or being African American, Native American, or gay, when they're confronted with intelligent retorts, the prejudiced individual will inevitably resort to saying something like this. Oh, now look, you know me. We've known each other for years. You know I'm not sexist. You know I'm not racist. I have a lot of black friends. You know I'm not anti-Semitic. But everybody knows women and men are different. Everybody knows blacks and whites are different. Everybody knows gays and straights are different. And we know, who have been on the receiving end of that difference, that when a prejudiced individual says different, they mean inferior. Now, logically, those who have the power to build or create or define their society's symbolic universe have the power to create a world in which they and their priorities and values and operating procedures are not only dominant, but they are accepted and endorsed, usually without question, by the vast majority. That's just the way it is. In patriarchal societies like ours, where by definition, men are the dominant group, social, built, and metaphysical space are the products of male experience, male consciousness, and male control. And further, man-made space will be used to encode and to perpetuate white male superiority and the inferiority and subordination of women, peoples of color, and other marginalized groups, from confinement to the master bedroom and the back of the bus to exclusion from the corporate boardroom. In Chapter 1, the spatial caste system designed for social inequality, I continue to discuss the notion of building a symbolic universe by explaining how physical space and social space reflect and rebound upon each other. You know, both the world out there and the world inside ourselves depends upon and conforms to our socially learned perceptions and values. Neither is understandable without the other. Think about it. We keep a professional distance from students, from patients, from clients, from employees. We look up to another person to signify respect, look down on them to signify disrespect or disdain. Space provides an essential framework for thinking about the world and people in it. We're constantly made aware of this social function of space by the numerous spatial expressions we use in just our ordinary everyday language. Expressions Expressions like high society, climbing the ladder of success, political circles, narrow-mindedness, everything has its place, and so on, remind us that events take place, that social life is shaped, and that people exist in relationship to space and time. The simple fact is, we don't really know who we are until we know where we are. And that understanding is not the same for all of us. The cognitive map, or mental picture, that each of us carries around in our heads of the image of our physical surroundings is what allows us to give directions to each other by saying turn right at the gas station and so on, is largely dependent upon the social space that each of us occupies. For example, in urban societies, the traditional, although changing, but traditional gender-based division of labor ensured that the housebound suburban homemaker mother would not have the same image of her physical environment as her wage-earning husband who spent most of his day in a steel and glass office building in the central city. Similarly, patterns of race and class segregation guarantee that the children of New York City's Harlem will not identify or connect the uptown Park Avenue that they know with the downtown Park Avenue of opulent apartment buildings and clean tree-lined sidewalks. In addition to gender, race, and class, other factors like age, physical ability or disability, occupation, sexual orientation, collectively create distinctly different spatial experiences for each of us, even within the same environmental setting. Let me give you an example. In office towers, typical skyscrapers, the hidden architectural realm of the blue-collar building supervisor or building superintendent or janitor, with its fire stairs and below-ground entries and parking garages and loading docks, boiler rooms, is rarely glimpsed by the white-collar workers and white-collar executives and the public who enter that same building through marble-clad lobbies and ascend to their destinations in richly painted and carpeted elevators. Similarly, the assignment of valuable lighted space in those buildings is related to one's traditionally gender-based occupational status. For instance, in repetitious skyscraper floor plans, interior fluorescent lit space is invariably allocated to whom? The clerical workers, who have, by occupational segregation, traditionally been predominantly women. While the exterior offices with the natural light views, good windows, and so on, who got those? The executives, who have traditionally been predominantly men, and continue to be. I'll give you another example. In John Hancock building, I discovered with some research, of course in Boston, a senior vice president is allowed 406 square feet of space compared to a clerical worker's 55. In a book called The Secretarial Ghetto, Mary Kathleen Bennett showed that women receive the same proportion of office space as they do pay, 20 to 50% less than men doing the same work in the same office. The social and architectural history of the maternity hospital provides another example of how public buildings are designed and used to support the social purposes they're meant to serve. In this case, the social caste system. I'll give you a brief background. The maternity hospital was actually established in the 19th century as an urban-based charity asylum to serve the poor, the homeless, and the working class. Usually maternity hospitals were sponsored and run by businessmen, by clergy, and community leaders, and they functioned as institutions offering both physical, medical treatment and social rehabilitation. Now, many of the expectant mothers who were in these early maternity hospitals were the servants of wealthy women who received their own health care in the privacy of their own homes or in their physician's office. Others were unwed mothers who were sympathetically viewed as the victims of ignorance and urban living. The maternity hospital provided these cases with both a simulated home delivery and a 2-month stay, 1 month before, 1 month after childbirth, where these women could learn to become respectable by helping to clean up the hospital. By mid-century, doctors began to realize that standards of modesty at the time, which made it absolutely unthinkable to expose a woman's genitals, had fear of their patients' disapproval should these standards of modesty be violated, had quite seriously hampered their knowledge of clinical midwifery. So they began to see that the maternity hospital, filled with women in no social position to complain about it, as an opportunity to remedy their ignorance of the processes of birth. What they could learn on poor or fallen women in the hospital, they could use to treat respectable women at home. In 1848, the American Medical Association was founded to establish state licensing regulations that set standards that excluded midwives from medical practice through the use of forceps instruments and promoted hospital deliveries over home deliveries. Now why? Doctors sought to centralize medical care in hospitals in order to control their own workspace. You know, doctors' skills depended on the use of instruments, and while you could carry forceps and scissors from house to house for home birth, x-rays, anesthesia machines, transfusion equipment, sterilizing equipment, these objects were tied to the hospital. So in order to receive specialized treatment, the patient would have to come to the specialist workplace. Now, if giving birth was the ultimate in femininity, then supervising and controlling it became quintessentially masculine. And the obstetrician's workplace was designed accordingly. Like factories and office buildings, obstetrical units were spatially designed to operate very efficiently. Specialized tasks and workers were separated in assembly-like fashion, fragmenting both the process of birth and the spaces in which it occurred into three standard spatial domains: the labor and delivery suite, this still exists in hospitals, the newborn nursery, and the postpartum nursing unit. Like a product being processed in a factory, the childbearing couple was controlled historically and manipulated by the hospital's rigid policies and an overwhelming maze of spaces from the very moment they entered the admitting room. The maternity patient who managed to get the forms filled out before the onset of labor generally found herself escorted in a wheelchair with her husband dragging her all down these sort of anonymous corridors and a series of elevators until they finally arrived at the labor and delivery suite. And then, having arrived, they were each forced to go their separate ways, she to labor and he to wait, both in isolation, both confused and often frightened, and both very much in need of each other's company. Having endured the labor room when a woman was supposedly ready to deliver, she was wheeled onto a very narrow stretcher to a sterile operating suite or delivery room, where she was placed on a narrow metal table with stirrups to hold her legs up high in the air and leather thongs to tie down her arms and her wrists. And there was no telling how long she would wait there in this position. Immediately following delivery, the infant was whisked away from its mother to the neonatal or newborn nursery for observation, where then she was taken by stretcher to a recovery room. From there, after recovery, she was taken to the postpartum unit where she stayed generally for 3 to 5 days. And the husband had somebody who was strange come out and say, it's a boy, it's a girl, go look down through this piece of glass over here and pretend that you realize that that's your child. The family was never fully, of course, united. I don't know how many of you went through this process. You all went through some process of birth. How many of you gave birth and participated as husbands in the process of watching a child be born, experienced the joy and trauma of that kind of separation, but the family was really never in this historical model fully in charge of the control over its own decisions until they were really discharged from the hospital. But during the 1970s, a lot of that changed, and so did the design of hospitals. The idea of women gaining control over their own bodies became a very major tenet of the women's movement. And those members at that time in the women's movement were predominantly white, educated, and middle-class women. And as a result of feminist demands for choices in childbearing, during the 70s and 80s, most hospitals changed their rigid policies and added natural childbirth suites, birthing rooms, to their traditional obstetrical units. And in this case, then, childbearing couples were able to experience natural childbirth where husband and wife partners were able to stay with each other and witness the birth of their own child. These decades decades also gave rise to a brand new building type, one that I was involved in and working out in Portland, Oregon with some midwives, called the Freestanding Natural Child Birth Center. There are many across the country now that were absolutely legal. Then there were no zoning regulations and building codes that would allow them to exist. They were designed to provide affordable, comprehensive pre- and postnatal care, and to foster consumer control in the experience of childbirth as a joyous and natural biological event, part of the human life cycle. Now, public buildings like corporate towers and maternity hospitals that actually spatially segregate or exclude certain groups or relegate them to spaces in which they are either invisible or visibly subordinate are the direct result of a comprehensive system of social oppression, of social caste. They're not the consequences of failed architecture or prejudiced architects. However, our collective failure to notice and acknowledge how buildings are designed and used to support the social purposes they're meant to serve, including the maintenance of social inequality, guarantees that we will never do anything to end discriminatory design. When such an awareness does exist, then discrimination can be redressed. To be consciously aware of the social dimensions of architecture enables all of us, particularly architects, designers, and planners, to evaluate and transform existing buildings more successfully and to propose other more inclusive solutions. After all, separate entries in public schools for boys and girls, separate sections in restaurants for blacks and whites, the absence of curb cuts and wheelchair ramps in all public buildings except hospitals are now all virtually illegal because of the actions of those whose commitment to social justice was informed by distinction consciousness. To further illustrate how physical settings and spatial boundaries support social inequality, I'm going to turn now from examples of public buildings and spaces to examining how people are housed as a barometer for measuring their social status and well-being. I'm specifically going to briefly describe to you the housing needs and experiences of three groups that I've worked with very closely for the last decade or so through my teaching, my research, and my pro bono design practice. Low-income and very poor women, the elderly, and people with AIDS. In a book chapter entitled, which I've noticed as an excerpt in this quite nice exhibit that we're going to get to see later on, thanks to Nomas, The Home as a Metaphor for Society, I explained that while the privately owned house, the great American dream house, symbolizes the stature of the traditional male-headed nuclear family, American public housing serves the opposite purpose, that of isolating and stigmatizing poor, female-headed, primarily minority families. In 1980, a long time ago, 73% of American households in public housing were headed by women. The figures were quite comparable in Canada. By the late 1980s, the U.S. figure had risen to over 90%. Women are segregated in public housing, which has literally become a female ghetto because they're just simply too poor to live anywhere else. In 1978, almost half of all female-headed households in America lived in poverty, compared to 5% of male-headed households. Since then, poverty has decreased among families in which there are men, but substantially increased in those that are headed by women. Because women, primarily based on economic and job discrimination, are frequently more impoverished than men, they're more likely to live in substandard housing. Here's some U.S. labor statistics, housing statistics. As long ago as 1974, there was a 20% probability that a woman who headed a household would live in substandard housing. That's compared to 10% of the general population. Now, if that woman was Hispanic as well, the probability increased to 26%. If she was African American, it was 28%. If she was rural and elderly, perhaps because of her geographic isolation, the least visible and the most forgotten of the poverty population in this country, 31%. To me, these statistics reflect the cruel consequences of interlocking gender, race, and class discrimination. find garbage lined hallways, elevators that reek of urine, and young men, gangs of men, loitering in trash-strewn yards making drug deals. Frequently, the fire department and police refuse to enter these public housing estates. I teach in Newark. I look out of my design studio and I see public housing that looks like what I'm describing. It was just, Stella Wright houses were just imploded, as Purigo was, I'll harken more closely to St. Louis a long time ago. You know, the discovery of fresh corpses in and around these buildings, the victims of shootings and assault, is a regular occurrence in this country in public housing. Certainly, minority women are not the only people who live with such conditions in public housing. Racism has ensured the relative powerlessness and poverty of minority men as well. But the fact that women and their children are the vast majority is evidence to me that while some women's lives have changed dramatically as a result of the women's movement, others remain insufferable and untouched. Today in America, there's more than 18 million women who are living with leaking toilets, no heat or hot water, exposed electrical wiring, broken plaster, and lead-based paint, with only the companionship of small children who are often hungry and inadequately clothed. I have known many mothers to stay up all night to protect their sleeping infants from rats. Other residents in public housing are old and frail. I live in New York City. I read about them in the newspapers, in the New York Times. They're found frozen to death in their own homes in severe winters like we had last winter. No one, not a welfare recipient, not the poorest of the poor of human beings, would choose to live in a dangerous environment that is associated, rightly or wrongly, with broken families and crime and vandalism. The child who grows up in the projects is made to feel ashamed every time he or she is asked where they live. Despite the cruelty of this stigma, homelessness is cruel and still, and there are very long waiting lists to get into public housing all across the country. You know, the dream of raising one's children in a decent place of one's own is no less compelling for the poor family than the rich one, for the single parent than the couple, for the African American or the white person. Subsidized housing which fosters the debased social environment through either its design or its management or its social connotation, in my mind, is not a gift from society to the needy. It's at best tokenism, and at worst, a humiliating punishment. I want to move on to the second group, the elderly, and talk a little bit about their housing needs and experiences. Because in the near future, the elderly are going to constitute the largest special needs population in terms of housing. As the 85 and older population quadruples in the next 40 years in the United States, we're simply not going to have anywhere to put them. We would have to have added 220 new nursing home beds every day between 1989 and the year 2000 just to meet the demands of the 1990s. And the already ridiculously high annual cost of between $23,000 and $60,000 per person for skilled nursing care is going to soar as demand exceeds supply. By the year 2010, the baby boom generation is going to begin to turn 64. By 2020, the Census Bureau estimates that for every 100 middle-aged persons, there's going to be 253 senior citizens. By 2030, all the baby boomers, that's over 77 million people, that's a third of the current U.S. population, will be senior citizens. I don't think that any change in the 21st century will have a more profound effect on how American society is going to look and feel and think and behave. We're all going to look like Cocoon. Remember that movie that, I visited my mother and father in Florida for a long time before they passed away, and I often felt I was in Cocoon in Fort Lauderdale. I'm quickly arriving in my own cocoon. Families are going to feel the strains of the aging society acutely. Not only will the percentage of older people, the elderly be greater, people are going to be older for life. most important vehicle for savings that we've had to offer in the United States, home ownership. You buy a house, it rises in value and equity as you pay down the mortgage, you age in place. You have a nest egg to cash in on in retirement. Now, many of today's priced-out younger couples and singles may never be able to buy, and while I don't endorse home ownership as a way of fostering enfranchisement in our society, nevertheless, since that is a prevalent system for nest building, there are worrisome consequences for people whose later lives, there will be no home in which to sell in terms of retirement. This affordability gap could be the first step toward creating a new class of elderly who, without that equity cushion, are going to have to depend on a social security system even more heavily, and that system's future already looks very shaky. In addition to living with grown children in retirement communities and in nursing homes, the elderly are going to band together in dormitories, in shared apartments, in boarding houses, in single-room occupancy hotels, and in communes in order to save money, to find companionship, and to reduce their sense of isolation. Many, many more of them will be living in shared suburban houses, the kind that we have all over America, in which there will be legalized accessory apartments created. Life care cooperative housing. How many of you have heard of life care cooperative housing? That many. Well, you will if you have. Perhaps you've been reticent. I know more of you must surely have heard of that. This type of housing is triple-tiered housing. It provides a gradient of health-related services built into it, all the way from independent living to assisted living to skilled nursing care, as those who live in that dwelling environment find them necessary and determine that they're needed. I believe life care cooperatives are going to become, life care housing is going to become the norm. To date, the small numbers that we are seeing have been built usually by corporations like Marriott or Hyatt, people in the hospitality business, and they're available only to the very affluent, usually those who have a big house to sell, to be able to afford to buy into these condominium arrangements and pay very large monthly maintenance fees. But in the next several decades, we're going to see life care housing both owned and rented, designed, managed, and made available for people of all kinds of incomes who will even want it. I think we're going to see universities, government, trade unions, fraternal associations, insurance companies, all supporting and offering this form of benefit, life care housing. You know, older people differ, and so is their housing. Some own estates and stocks and precious possessions, and others can put their possessions in a shopping bag. But to a greater or lesser degree, all people, including all of us, will ultimately eventually have to face the insidious loss of social status and function that all too unfortunately accompanies aging in our society. One terribly important determining factor in the well-being of the older population are the circumstances in which they are housed. Regardless of income or race or gender, all older people must have access to secure housing and to health care that empowers them with the dignity of their independence. I'd like to finally turn to the last group, housing for people with HIV and AIDS. With no known cure currently available, the burgeoning AIDS population is generating vast increases in demand for health and social services. Now, although we know that more cost-effective and humane care can be provided outside of the hospital, many AIDS patients remain unnecessarily hospitalized because they have nowhere else to go. Increasingly, people with AIDS are finding themselves homeless. As their illness progresses, they're unable to work, and they can't afford to pay their rent or their mortgage payments. Others are evicted illegally by AIDS-phobic landlords. In 1992, the World Health Organization estimated there were 10 million people globally that were infected with HIV, the virus that causes AIDS. And they estimate that 40 million will be by the year 2000. date here in our country, nearly 250,000 people, 250,000 cases of AIDS have been recorded nationwide. Last year, 1 million people had HIV in America. 45,000 Americans died of AIDS. In New York, where I live, AIDS has become the leading cause of death among men between the ages of 25 and 44, women between the ages of 25 and 34, and children between the ages of 1 and 4. In 1989, there were 8,000 homeless New Yorkers with AIDS-related HIV illness. Would you believe there were only 8 apartment units available to house 8,000 homeless people with AIDS? Last year, the Partnership for the Homeless estimated the figure had actually jumped to 30,000, making people with AIDS the largest subgroup of all of New York City's homeless. Now, although we all know that in the United States the AIDS epidemic first appeared and spread in the gay community, in addition to homeless adults, the virus is absolutely skyrocketing among women, children, and adolescents. How many of you in the audience here are between the ages of 15 and 24? AIDS is the 7th leading cause of death in the United States for people in that age category. That's nothing to laugh about. The AIDS epidemic wears the face of a woman or an infant in New Jersey, where I teach architecture, more than in any other part of this country. Women comprise 21%, and infants another 3% of the AIDS population in the state. In Newark, where NJIT is located, 1 baby in 63 tests positive for HIV. 1 in 63. In Jersey City, the figure is 1 in 79. The majority of women and children with HIV and AIDS are poor, urban, African American, and Hispanic. Often infected children live with their mothers and other infected or healthy children and adults in deplorably substandard housing. Many of the mothers become understandably severely depressed and having to cope with their own poverty and their own terminal illness, as well as that of their children. Frequently, children with AIDS don't have families to care for them at all. Their mothers may be active drug users, prostitutes, homeless, or ill, or dead as a result of AIDS. Poor access to health care, racism, homophobia, poverty, inadequate housing, and inadequate treatment for substance abuse have emerged as common themes that contribute to the severity of the epidemic among these populations. Now, you know, however you may feel about drugs, or AIDS, or sexual behavior, if we are to call ourselves a moral and a civilized society, then all people with AIDS, regardless of life circumstances, must be entitled to compassionate care and safe and dignified places in which to live for as long as life is theirs to live. As long as life is theirs to live. Every community across our country, including Muncie, Indiana, has to begin to create new facilities to meet the needs of people facing the challenge of HIV and AIDS and their caregivers, their families, their loved ones. From housing and child care to social services, medical, and hospice care. There are basically 7 different kinds of facilities currently being developed and available around the country to assist with housing and health care for people with AIDS. Let me just run through what some of these combined type facility or building types are. There are freestanding acute care hospices, transitional foster care homes for infants and children, congregate living health facilities for terminally ill people who need assistance but not hospitalization, skilled nursing homes, adult day centers, family residential care facilities. There's only one in the country. The other model is one that my students and I developed, which is being built in Newark now. And finally, group residencies for homeless adults. Now, we're going to need new, flexible, cost-effective zoning ordinances, building codes, and licensing regulations for AIDS facilities. We're going to need outspoken advocacy by architectural and planning, educators and practitioners, by health and social service providers, by housing developers, and yes, by compassionate neighbors, supporting the creation of local waste facilities in their own backyards, at meetings of town and planning boards in their neighborhoods. And as we develop new models of supportive housing for people with AIDS, I'm absolutely convinced that we will find that such housing will also benefit other groups in need of healing, shelter care environments, like those who are living with cancer, and the 4 million Americans with Alzheimer's disease, and the elderly, and battered women, and those with chemical dependencies, and people with physical, mental, and emotional disabilities. I really believe that we are entering a new era in which more and more architectural design and planning educators and practitioners will be designing with what I call a philosophy of care, acting as enablers, not just providers, emphasizing values, ethics, a concern for social justice among disadvantaged groups, and the creation of well-being as a goal in their architectural works. It is toward that purpose that I hope my book and my teaching will make some contribution. I want to conclude this evening with just the following thought. Architecture exists fundamentally as the expression of an established social order. It's not easily changed until the society that produced it is changed. And yet, by its very nature, the built environment suggests the world transformed as well as the means for its transformation. If we are to design a society in which all people and all living things matter, then I really believe that more architects, designers, planners, and landscape architects need to become feminists. And more feminists, women and men alike, committed to social justice and human dignity and environmental restoration, need to concern themselves with the design and the quality of our physical landscapes. Thank you very much.